From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Julia Carr-Katzel. It's Tuesday, July 4. Integrity was a central issue in last year's federal election campaign and became one of Labor's key election commitments. Now, a body has finally been established. The National Anti-Corruption Commission, or NACC, is an independent agency that investigates and reports on serious corruption in the public sector. Its Commissioner Paul Brereton says it's an historic
moment, representing the convergence of several streams. This confluence makes this potentially an inflection moment when we can make an enduring difference in the ethics and integrity of the governance of the Commonwealth.
The timing is fortuitous, just as state-based integrity watchdog ICAC released its explosive findings about former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, while the PwC tax leak scandal and former Coalition Minister Stuart Robert have been referred to the new national watchdog.
We know that you are watching expectantly, and we are very conscious that it is in your interests and for your benefit that we must exercise our functions.
Today, federal political correspondent Lisa Visentin on whether the NACC will have enough teeth to stamp out corruption in Australian politics. So Lisa, the National Anti-Corruption Commission, or NACC, officially opened its doors over the weekend. It's been described as the biggest reform to federal public accountability in over 40 years. Tell us a bit about the calls for a body like this we've seen over the years and why it's taken us so long to get here.
Sure. So to understand the bumpy road that has taken us to get to this point where the NACC is opening this week, really, you really have to go back to the last parliament, to the coalition era and to the Morrison government in particular. There had been a growing momentum for a federal corruption watchdog for some time, and the coalition, sort of under pressure to deliver something, put a model on the table that was really widely panned by integrity experts and by lawyers as being sort of effectively toothless and far below the sort of standard of corruption agencies that are already operating at a state level. You then fast forward to the 2022 election campaign, and the Morrison government had been dogged by a string of scandals. You know, there'd been the sports rorts, the car park rorts, to name a few.
First time how clubs were ranked under the contentious grants program, and how embattled Deputy Nationals leader Bridget McKenzie ignored the advice of public servants in awarding funds across the country.
Have you been promised anything by the Prime Minister to take the fall for this?
Oh, yeah, come on. Really?
Absolutely.
No, not at all.
They were under a lot of political pressure to deliver something, but during that campaign, Scott Morrison effectively walked away from even this fairly underwhelming model that he was proposing.
Morrison, have you seen any corruption on your side of politics in your time? And if so, what did you do about it?
No, I haven't.
Never? No wrongdoing?
No.
Never happened in the Liberal Party at all?
I haven't seen that, no.
Is that why you don't really...
You know, he famously described the New South Wales ICAC as a kangaroo court.
They don't want a Commonwealth Integrity Commission. They want a Commonwealth kangaroo court that can go and pry and pursue political vendettas, Mr. Speaker.
And he was, I think, quite clearly trying to tap into the enormous public sentiment that supported Gladys Berejiklian at the time. She was back then still waiting for the findings to come down against her. Obviously, we know today that has been a widely criticised part of the ICAC process, how long she had to wait.
Speaker, with disgraceful treatment of the former Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian. Now, the Leader of the Labor Party may support what was done to Gladys Berejiklian, Mr. Speaker, but I do not.
But he was sort of leveraging that to cover the fact that his government really had no viable policy to offer in that space and didn't have something that he was going to put on the table if his government was re-elected. And you contrast that at the same time with Labor, who promised to deliver a corruption body that they said would be powerful. That's how they described it, you know, within their first year of office. And really from there, the rest is history. Labor won, the Liberals lost a swag of seats, including those 7 or so seats to the Teals, where integrity was a key part of their campaign. They campaigned on the need for a federal corruption watchdog. And so on the other side of the election, you had the Albanese government, and one of the major pieces of legislation they put on the table was to establish the NACC. And the coalition, led by Peter Dutton, realised that they needed to get on board with the public sentiment on this issue. They couldn't maintain the stance that the Morrison government had. And so they supported the passage of the NACC legislation when it went through the Parliament last year. And here we are.
Okay, and can you give us an idea of how the NACC will operate and what its powers will be?
Yeah, right. So it opened its doors on July 1, which was, technically a Saturday, but operationally it's up and running, so it can receive referrals from anyone. It's led by Commissioner Paul Brereton. He's a former New South Wales Court of Appeal judge, and perhaps best known for leading the Brereton inquiry into war crimes by the Australian Defence Force in Afghanistan. The most important thing about the Commission is it's independent. That means its agenda cannot be dictated by the government or by anyone. It has a wide remit to investigate serious or systemic corruption. That's sort of the animating principle behind it. And it's up to the Commissioner to determine what that constitutes. But its remit is focused on Commonwealth public officials. So we're talking about, MPs, their staffers, bureaucrats, agency heads, and third-party contractors working with the Commonwealth. So it's sort of a wide expanse of people who work within that Commonwealth public sphere. It has opened its doors with 180 staff already, and that's expected to grow to 260 people over the next 2 years. Paul Brereton made some comments on Monday, basically acknowledging the Commission was up and running. He said that as of, 5 p.m. on Sunday, so it had been open for a bit over 24 hours, it had already received 44 referrals online. You can only imagine that will grow in the coming weeks and months. And he sort of just outlined basically the powers that it would have, which are pretty similar to the powers that, the New South Wales ICAC or the Victorian body has. And that's basically, it has the ability to start investigations of its own accord, can conduct hearings to obtain evidence, it can summons witnesses, it can require the production of documents and to take evidence under oath, all those kind of key necessary features that we see in other corruption watchdogs.
Okay, and as you say, the NACC has been flooded with a list of scandals to investigate, including former Coalition Minister Stuart Robert's dealings with consulting firm Synergy 360, the PwC tax scandal. But before we do get into all of that, the New South Wales Integrity Watchdog, ICAC, made some pretty serious corrupt findings against former Premier Gladys Berejiklian and former MP Daryl Maguire last week. What were the main findings of its report?
So the ICAC found that Gladys Berejiklian had engaged in serious corrupt conduct, that she had breached public trust by failing to declare that she was in a conflict of interest relationship with Daryl Maguire. He was then the member for Wagga Wagga, and that she was secretly in a close personal relationship with him at the time. So during that time, she was involved in the awarding of 2 grants to Daryl Maguire's electorate, one for a gun club and one for a conservatorium of music. So the ICAC found that she'd breached the ministerial code in her actions and that she'd failed to report her suspicions about Maguire's conduct to the ICAC and that she should reasonably have had these suspicions. Maguire himself, of course, has been found by the ICAC to have been corrupt as well, that he used his office to seek out financial gain, and he has been recommended for criminal charges by the ICAC, whereas this is an important distinction, Gladys Berejiklian has not.
And the ICAC itself has come under fire for taking so long to deliver its decision. Were there other failures along the way, and do you think the watchdog needs to change?
I think there's been a widespread acknowledgement from legal experts, but also even people who you would expect to be critics of Gladys Berejiklian, that it has been far too long, this process, that she shouldn't have had to have waited 2 years from the moment of giving evidence to receiving a finding. It's something that is much longer than if you'd gone through a court process. And I think the acknowledgement that that has taken too long is in the fact that the ICAC itself is now conducting a review about why it took so long, and there's a discussion now about deadlines that need to be imposed to make sure that these findings come down in a timely manner. But I think this is a decision that will go down in the annals of New South Wales political history. She was such a widely popular and respected figure. But I suppose that underlines the importance of agencies like this, is that they stand at arm's length from government, they stand at arm's length from the people, and they are supposed to operate with no biases and no regard for personal popularity. it shouldn't be a trade-off for the citizens of New South Wales or anywhere really, that in exchange for having someone who's viewed as a competent leader, that you have to accept a little bit of corruption along the way. And that's why these agencies exist. I think there'll be a long-running debate in the wake of this, though, as there has been for a long time around the ICAC, about the way that it operates in public, about the lack of appeals process when a decision is handed down, and the reputational damage that people can incur along the way with limited avenues to, I guess, appeal that or restore their reputation on the other side of it.
And what takeaways are there from the way this state-based integrity watchdog operates and how the national body will? Are there any concerns about how the NACC will operate and its own limits?
Right, so the biggest difference with the NACC and the New South Wales ICAC is that the NACC will have a default setting of private hearings. This was actually a really contested point as the legislation was going through the federal parliament last year. Labor had promised a model that would have public hearings, but in a deal with the coalition, as the legislation was going through, this turned into a very sort of limited avenue for holding public hearings. Essentially, the NACC has adopted the threshold that Victoria's corruption body has, which is that it will only hold public hearings when there are deemed to be so-called exceptional circumstances, and that's written into the legislation. So in Victoria, that has been interpreted very narrowly. So it's really unclear exactly how this will play out federally, you know, what sort of conduct and who needs to be involved for it to meet that threshold of exceptional circumstances to hold a public hearing. I mean, that's going to be one of the fascinating tests for the new NACC. But the obvious juxtaposition, of course, is with New South Wales, where once the ICAC decides to hold an inquiry, it's public and there are public hearings and witnesses, you know, give evidence in public. The NACC, like the Victorian system, will most likely be having those hearings and that scrutiny done behind closed doors. And it's very possible that the first thing we'll know about the substance of an inquiry, or even that one is going on or has been held, is when the NACC's final investigation report lands with its findings.
And as you said before, the NACC has already received 44 referrals. Tell us about some of those and what you anticipate might be on its agenda over the next few months.
Yeah, so while there has been this sort of deluge of referrals, it is up to the NACC to decide what they look into. They are independent. But in the meantime, I guess you've seen this jostling in the political sphere. We know the Greens have a top 10 hit list of issues that they plan to refer, and they've referred some of those already. For example, the PwC tax scandal. They've also got on their list to refer former Coalition Minister Stuart Robert and his Synergy 360 dealings, which involved questions of to what extent Stuart Robert helped this consulting firm, Synergy 360, which was run by friends of his, to what extent he helped them secure lucrative contracts. And Stuart Robert has denied any wrongdoing, but that is something that would potentially be on the NACC's radar. Robo-debt, sports rorts, those are among the things the Greens have referred. But whether or not the Commission picks those up, really, I mean, we won't know. On the coalition side of things, they've said that they want to refer the financial settlement that Brittany Higgins struck with the Commonwealth. So there's always, I guess, an element of politicisation around this, but the biggest and best feature of the NACC is it sits above all of this, and it can separate itself out from these sort of political scramblings. It doesn't have to listen to any of these referrals. The referrals from the Greens carry about as much weight as a referral you and I would make, or a referral that a coalition MP would make. Anyone can make a referral. It's up to the agency to decide whether it has merit.
And just finally, Lisa, do you have faith in the NACC and what it'll be able to achieve? Do you think it will help stamp out corruption in Australian politics?
Yeah, I do have faith in it. I mean, I think there'll be a strong deterrent effect knowing that this body is now in operation, but it's also been led by someone in Paul Brereton who is widely respected, including by both sides of politics. But ultimately, we won't truly be able to judge it until we see it in action, until we see its first investigation, which really may not be for some time. It might be many months, maybe a year before we see the product of its work. But the framework governing it is strong. So regardless of the differing views that people have about whether hearings should be in public or in private, the most important thing, and I know I keep stressing this, but the most important thing is that it's independent. So that should protect it from being politicised and being dragged into political point-scoring exercises.
Thanks so much for your time, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by me, Julia Karkatzel. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Julia Karkatzel. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.